Hey, I'm Liv. Welcome to today's video, which is going to be about amputee terminology. If you don't know, I lost my leg many years ago in a bombing, and I made this channel to share about that and everything that goes with it. If that sounds interesting to you, I hope you hit subscribe down below. Anyways, so I've been making videos for a couple months now, and I realized that I probably use some terminology that most people aren't familiar with. There's not really any reason for someone who's not involved in the amputee world to know about this terminology. So I thought I'd share it with you. I'll preface this in saying that this is not all the terminology that's typically used, it's just words that are common in my lexicon. The first word is what I am, which is a BK. A BK, which is also a below knee amputee. I've learned not to mush that word together because it sounds like baloney. Below knee amputee. Yeah, that's happened before. So this is for a transtibial amputation, which is below the knee, somewhere along the tibia, which is basically your shin bone. Next we have AK, which is above the knee, as you probably guessed. This type of amputation is also called transfemoral, which is basically along the femoral bone, also known as femur or thigh bone. Then we have AE, which is above elbow. As you can figure, this is above the elbow, also called transhumeral. Then we have BE, which is below the elbow, also called transradial. You can also have a bilateral amputee, which is someone who is missing both arms or both legs to varying degrees. There's also, and I didn't know this one until I started looking this stuff up, a digital amputation. Sounds kind of cool, but it's basically the loss of a digit, toes or fingers. Okay, let's go into the anatomy of a prosthesis. Firstly, we have the residual limb or the stump. Some people have a preference about that. I say stump. That is what I refer to my remaining leg to be. It's my understanding that that can be a sensitive term for some people, so when I'm out in public or on this channel, I'm trying to refer to it as residual limb. I personally say stump. If you're an amputee, I'd love to know what you say. Some people have names for their stumps. I don't have a name for mine, but mine is a dinosaur. It looks like a dinosaur. It has an eye and a mouth, and I can make it talk. Scar tissue. Anyways. All right, then we have the gel liner. This is what rolls directly onto your residual limb. This needs to be nice and tight and a perfect fit. You have to replace these relatively often, a couple times a year, depending on how much you use them and what kind of climate you live in. This is typically made out of silicone or TPU or sometimes even a custom material. In my case, there's also a sleeve that sits on top of the leg and rolls over the gel liner and over my skin to help hold the leg on. Like this. This right here would roll onto my leg, like this. Then we have the socket. This is arguably the most important part of the prosthesis. The correct fit of this is essential. This is typically made from polypropylene plastic, and amputees will typically need a new one every 3 to 5 years or so, depending on how long you've been an amputee and if you've had any significant body changes like weight gain or weight loss. When you're a new amputee, you have to get a new socket more frequently since your residual limb is changing shape more often. I've generally found that weight loss or gain of about 10 pounds or more can start to have a significant impact on the fit of the socket. At this point, you would start to use socks. They're not pictured here, but they're a fabric cotton lycra sort of blend of a sock that fits over the gel liner and increases the tension if needed. I almost always use at least one sock. Sometimes you have to change the amount of socks that you use depending on the time of day even. It could be that if you're really warm, your leg starts to swell and you might need to remove some socks. You're cold, you might need to add some socks so that you're always having the most optimum fit. You don't want any movement inside your socket. I typically use a 1-ply sock. This is it right here, but I have before gone up to even 10 or 12 ply, using multiple socks to get there. At this point, you're probably in desperate need of a new socket. Then you have the pylon, which is typically titanium, and this attaches the socket to the foot. And yes, that is literally the term that we use for the prosthetic foot. You can buy a foot off the shelf basically and then have it fitted at the prosthetist. Please note that this is a BK prosthesis. It is much more simplistic than an AK prosthesis, in which you might have terms relating to different artificial knees. That's a whole other ballgame. So when we refer to the prosthetic foot, that's the really cool technology that can help you have energy return when you're walking or run or even have ankle movement. The part that actually looks like a typical foot is called the foot shell and doesn't matter that much. I just got a new foot shell and it's gray. But previously I've had weird ones that just look like human feet in mannequin form. The way that all of this comes together is very important. And this is where the term alignment comes in. If your alignment is off, you could have terrible back pain, hip pain, all sorts of issues. You could have issues walking, balancing. If you hear an amputee talking about going to get an alignment, they're going to be getting their prosthesis adjusted so that it's better aligned to their bodies. This can include adjusting the alignment of the foot, the pylon, the socket, everything, even the height. Dropping or raising the height of a prosthesis by even a 1/16 of an inch can have a huge impact. And you know how I said the socket was so important? It's so important, in fact, that you also need a check or a test socket. This is a temporary plastic socket that is typically just used to determine the fit. You can wear it, test it out for a couple of days. You can't do anything hard on it. You might break it if you do. And oftentimes you have to have changes made, things heated and pushed out or pads put in. And then that form is going to be used to cast your actual socket. There are new ways of making prosthetic sockets that I will be showing you at some point when I get mine done, but that's for another day. You may hear the term Apoversary. Many amputees celebrate or commemorate or acknowledge the day in which they lost their limb, and I've heard many people call it an Apoversary. I personally call it a life day. I've celebrated my life day for 20 years now. I call it life day because it is the day that I lived, that I almost died, and I survived. It's not just the day that I became an amputee. A term that I think many people seem to know, even if they don't know much about amputees, is phantom pains. It's a weird one, and even the doctors don't seem to entirely understand it. Phantom pain really is pain in the limb that isn't there. This seems to differ per every amputee, and it doesn't seem to correlate with any visible injury or damage. Many amputees have to take severe measures to try to deal with their phantom pains. They can be debilitating. I feel incredibly fortunate that I don't typically have to deal with phantom pains often, and if I do, it's because I've made a mistake. Maybe I'll do a video on this at some point, dealing with phantom pains, but if I get phantom pains, it typically means that my socket isn't fitting properly, and I wasn't really acknowledging how it wasn't fitting and addressing it. The nerves for your leg are still there, even though the leg isn't there. From my understanding, they just bundled up the nerves that were there and shoved it up into the residual limb and sewed it up. So those nerves are all there, and they can fire sometimes. On the rare times that I do get it, it is extremely painful. There's no way to sort of brace yourself for the pain or control yourself because it's like getting stabbed. So in my case, the pain is very sharp and sudden and stabbing. So when you hear an amputee go, something like that, it's probably phantom pains. Very hard to control. Pistoning. For me, this is a major cause of phantom pains. If I'm not fitting right in my socket and I start to piston, which is exactly how I guess it works in a train or a car, right? You're pistoning. If this is my residual limb and it starts to pound on the tip of the socket, I'm gonna start getting some serious phantom pains. Pistoning typically happens if your socket is not fitting well for some reason. And it can also depend on the attachment method of the socket, which is a whole nother story too. Atrophy. You know how I said new amputees will typically need a new socket more frequently than older amputees? This is in part due to atrophying. The muscles that you had, let's say in my case as a BK, the muscles that I had in my calf are now completely unnecessary. They're not going to be used inside a socket. It took many years for those muscles to start to atrophy, and at the point that I'm at now, 20 years later, there's not that much material to change. It still does change because I'm aging, my body is aging, and I'm bashing it around and using it. So it still does change, but not as significantly as when you're a new amputee. And finally, this one is in the news a lot lately, and I heard about it 20 years ago when I first became an amputee, and it scared the crap out of me. It was also really intriguing at the same time. At some point, I'm gonna have to sit down and research where this has gone. Osteointegration. Maybe you've seen it. It seems really high-tech and exciting. It has been around for a long time, at least 20 years. I think much more. But osteointegration is when the titanium structure needed for a prosthesis is implanted into a person's body. It then integrates with the body and a prosthesis is able to be fitted permanently. From my knowledge, I think this is primarily used for AKs, since it is much more difficult to fit an AK for prosthesis. As a BK, all you're doing is replacing an ankle. As an AK, you're replacing a knee and an ankle. Very hard, there's lots going on there. Additionally, there are many AKs that are very, very high level AKs, and that's so hard to get a prosthesis to sit comfortably there. And when I say high, I mean people who are missing their leg all the way up to their hip. This can be a life-changing procedure for those people. It scares me. I haven't researched it that much. I know someone who's done it, and maybe I'll get the chance to talk with him soon and see how it went. Whew. Anyways, that's a couple words for you, some amputee terminology. If I missed anything, or if there are any words that stood out that you would like some more information on, please let me know down below. Seriously, if you have anything to add, let us know down below. This is a great opportunity for learning from me too. If you found this video interesting, helpful, fun, informative, whatever, I hope you give it a thumbs up and let me know down below what you think. And don't forget to stick around and subscribe while you're here. Wherever you are, I hope you're having the best day that you possibly can. Be kind to the people around you. And thanks for hanging out.